Hello, my name is Brian E. Denton. I'm the author of the book A Year of War and Peace and the poetry collection Spiration. Welcome to my channel. This video is part of a series of videos on a playlist about Dante's Divine Comedy, which we're celebrating the 700th anniversary of this year. The inspiration for these videos is the 100 Days of Dante Project from Baylor University. The 100 Days of Dante Project seeks to cultivate a global readership of the great poem wherein readers will read 3 cantos per week and then gather together either in person or online to discuss those cantos. The link to the 100 Days of Dante project will be down in the show notes, so go ahead and click on that and take part with us. These videos are my contribution to the project. Today's video is about Canto 2 of the Inferno. The format of these videos is quite simple. The first part, this part right now, is going to be where I introduce myself in the series, and I'll ask for subscriptions, likes, and naturally, because this is a reading group, your comments on the subject. So please, if you'd like to, go ahead and subscribe to the channel, offer this video a like, and all the other videos too, and make a comment about Canto 2 down below in the comments section. The second portion of each video will be a quick synopsis where I will offer a brief overview of the characters, the plot, and the themes. Then in the third part of each video, I'll offer my own personal opinions. I call these the takeaways. And one quick note about the takeaways is that I tend to read books in a syntopical manner. A syntopical manner means that I will read each canto in relation to other pieces of art and literature. I'll ask, how do they agree with each other? How do they disagree with each other? How are they in conversation with one another? I also tend to read literature bibliotherapeutically, which means that I look to the trials and tribulations of the characters in any given work, and I look at how they succeed or they fail in addressing those trials and tribulations, and then I ask myself, how can I apply the lessons that they learned or didn't learn to my own life? Let's get right to it then. Dante's Inferno, Canto 2. We open, as we did in the first canto, with Dante the Pilgrim, and he's hyping himself up for this journey he's about to take with Virgil. Although, curiously enough, he says that he's alone on this journey, which is odd. I mean, he's right there next to Virgil. So what, Virgil's not good enough for you, Dante? Come on, man, get with it. Also curious, in order to best express his journey, Dante invokes the Muses. Now, this is interesting because, as you recall from our discussion in Canto 1, there's this great tension throughout the Divine Comedy between the pagan world and the Christian world. The pagan world obviously is represented by Virgil, and the Christian world is represented by Dante. And again, this is a Christian poem, which makes it very, very odd that Dante would invoke the Muses. After all, the Muses are what the pagans would invoke in order to tell a story. And indeed, we see that in Homer, we see that in Virgil himself, etc., etc. Whereas a Christian would be more likely to invoke God, like the psalmist does in the Psalms. But, it seemed to work for Dante. I mean, after all, 700 years later, there's some asshole in Queens still talking about the fruits of this invocation. So, Okay, so next, Dante falls into this great bout of self-pity and self-doubt. And he complains to Virgil that he is not up to the task. He is simply not up to going down into hell. He says to Virgil, hey man, you want me to go down into hell just like Aeneas went down into the underworld? And he doesn't say Aeneas, he says the father of Silvius, who is Aeneas, as you know because you've read the Aeneid. And he says, listen, I'm not like Aeneas. I'm not a great man of profound historical importance. Aeneas created Rome. Who am I, Dante? I'm just some jerk lost in the dark wood. Further, Dante compares himself unfavorably to Paul of Tarsus. This is the chosen vessel language in Canto 2. The same language also appears in the book of Acts, chapter 9, verse 15. And Dante, comparing himself to Paul, says, listen, my journey, I'm just some jerk who's lost in the woods. But Paul's journeys, he helped establish the Roman Catholic Church, which is one of the most powerful institutions in all of world history. How can Dante compare himself to these two men, he thinks? So it just fills him with doubt. There's no way he can compare to these two guys. He's not up to the task. And this line of thinking leads to some of the best lines, in my opinion, in world literature on the issue of self-doubt and its harmful effects. Dante writes, and as one who unwills what he has willed, changing his intent on second thought so that he quite gives over what he has begun, such a man was I on that dark slope. With too much thinking, I had undone the enterprise so quick in inception. So in response to this, Virgil simply calls Dante a coward. Then Virgil relates how he encountered Beatrice, and Beatrice convinced him to go help Dante and assure him and assist him on his journey. So a quick word about Beatrice. She's an important figure in the Divine Comedy, and there'll be much, much more on her later on. But for now, it's important to just remember two things. The first is that Beatrice is in paradise, as we see in this canto. So she's not there in person right now. It's Virgil relating a story of Beatrice who comes down from paradise. So Beatrice is dead, and she's been raised up into that heavenly realm. I mean, clearly she's hanging out there with the Virgin Mary, Rachel, and Lucy the Martyr. The second most important thing to keep in mind about Beatrice is that she not only figures into the Divine Comedy, she also appears in Dante's earlier poem, Vita Nuova. I won't go too deep into it here, but the Vita Nuova is essentially the secular companion piece to the Divine Comedy. Whereas the Divine Comedy is concerned with religious devotion and spiritual love, the Vita Nuova is concerned with earthly love. It features the love story between Dante and Beatrice. So what you need to know about Beatrice is that Dante knows who this woman is. He was in love with her before, and now she dies, spoiler alert, and she's up in paradise hanging out. And it's an interesting poem. I think if you like the Divine Comedy, you might like Vita Nuova, so go check that out. So what Virgil tells Dante is that Beatrice really, really wants you to go on this journey. She wants to help you. She wants Dante to enjoy the salvation that she enjoys up in paradise. And so she asks Virgil to go help him out, be his guide. And he does. So Canto 2, ending just like Canto 1 did, Dante and Virgil head off on their journey. And that's very interesting here because you'll note that Canto 1 and Canto 2 share a similar beginning and a similar end. In Canto 1, it starts with Dante alone in a wood. In Canto 2, Dante says he's alone in a wood. And then at the end, Canto 1 ends with Dante and Virgil setting off together, and this is also the same ending of Canto 2. They're about to go to hell. The first takeaway from Canto 2 is that cowardice is a killer, and self-sabotage will ruin you. Now, I'm sure we've all had moments of great self-doubt. I know I have. Maybe we didn't apply for a job that we thought that we weren't qualified for or experienced enough for. Maybe we didn't approach that special someone romantically because we thought we were inadequate. Perhaps when we were younger, say in high school or in college, we got really drunk the night before a big exam, so we could have an excuse for when we failed it. But the fact is, we don't know if we can succeed unless we first try. It's like Lucio says in Shakespeare's Measure for Measure. Our doubts are traitors. It makes us lose the good we oft might win by fearing to attempt. This is almost exactly what happens to Dante in today's canto. Think about it. He engages in self-doubt. He engages in self-pity. He turns coward. He may even be engaging in a little bit of self-sabotage, and it almost precludes him from even starting on the journey, which would have been a shame because then we wouldn't be here today together. Virgil does not want to hear this. He's having absolutely none of it. In fact, he tells Dante that this is cowardice masquerading as humbleness, and he rightly berates Dante.
You're weak, you're out of control, and you become an embarrassment to yourself and everybody else.
And then think about who Dante is comparing himself to. He's comparing himself to Aeneas and to Paul of Tarsus. I mean, think about that. These are household names, and they have been for centuries. Aeneas is the guy who established Rome, the eternal city. Paul's the guy who helped establish the Christian church, right? These are both world historically important institutions, Rome and the Catholic Church. So relax, Dante. Take it easy. You're not supposed to compare yourself to these type of guys. It's not good to do that. We hurt ourselves when we compare ourselves unfavorably to others. It's like Marcus Aurelius, another great Roman, once wrote, "Do not waste the remainder of your life in thoughts about others, when you do not refer your thoughts to some object of common utility. For you lose the opportunity of doing something else when you have such thoughts as these. What is such a person doing, and why, and what is he saying, and what is he thinking of, and what is he contriving, and whatever else of the kind makes us wander away from the observation of our own ruling power." So in the end, don't fall into the traps of cowardice and self-sabotage. We're not Dante. We're not going to be able to call upon the help of Latin poet shades and the friends of the Blessed Virgin Mary to help us and get us motivated. That only happens very, very rarely, and usually only with the assistance of heroic doses of psychedelics. And that brings us to my second takeaway from Canto 2, and that is what can help us avoid, say, self-sabotage and cowardice. And that answer is the liberal arts and the humanities. We talked about this a bit yesterday, but it bears repeating again today because it appears again today. and that is the importance of the liberal arts and the humanities. And I say that because you have to think of Virgil in this poem as representing the liberal arts and the humanities. He is, after all, one of the great poets in world history. So I think it's appropriate to think of the great works of art and literature as the storehouse of human knowledge and wisdom. These works, I believe, have found purchase through multiple generations because they have something important to say about the human condition. This isn't to say that newer works are not important and that they can't be profitable when you read them or view them. It's just that, in my opinion, at least, the classics are almost certainly to supply the wisdom and knowledge that you need in your life because they've been subjected to the preferences of multiple generations rather than just the prejudices of one. In this sense, then, the classics are more likely to be universal in their application. But note, Beatrice doesn't just want Virgil to help Dante because he's from the classical world and he represents the liberal arts. She also wants him for his polished words, right? His polished words. His ability and faculty with language. There's something about poetry in particular, and imaginative literature in general, which speaks, perhaps uniquely, to the human spirit. I'm reminded of the narrator of Northern Abbey by Jane Austen, when that narrator describes novels as being works in which the greatest powers of mind are displayed, in which the most thorough knowledge of human nature, the happiest delineation of its varieties, the liveliest effusions of wit and humor, are conveyed to the world in the best chosen language. So to conclude, read widely, read often, and read the classics. The third takeaway from this canto, and indeed from the entire Divine Comedy itself, is that you should be paying attention to the structure, particularly the symmetry involved in this poem. It's almost mathematical. In particular, you're going to see the number 3 a lot, and this shouldn't come as a surprise, really. Or at least it probably didn't come as a surprise to the medieval church because the Christians have the theology of Trinitarianism. We see this number 3 repeatedly throughout the entire Divine Comedy. First of all, the Divine Comedy is 3 books. Secondly, the Divine Comedy is written in triplets. And finally, the Divine Comedy has cantos in each book, the number of which are divisible by 3, except for Inferno, which has an extra canto, which most scholars say serves the purpose of the prologue to the entire series. More specifically, though, we want to look at the plot beats in the first 2 cantos here. This also follows what we can call the rule of 3, right? There are 3 beats. In Canto 1, Dante starts off in a dark wood. In Canto 2, he's in peril once again in the dark wood, ravaged by cowardice and self-doubt, as we discussed. Then in Canto 1, remember that Dante is assailed by 3 wild beasts. Well, he's helped by 3 blessed ladies, friends of the Virgin Mary, in Canto 2. Then the third beat. It happens at the end of each canto. Canto 1, Virgil and Dante are heading off together on their journey, which is exactly what they're doing at the end of Canto 2. Now, keen readers, they're going to be able to notice this rule of 3 throughout the entire Divine Comedy. And there's a good reason for this, because it was intentional by Dante. I think what he's trying to do here is emulate the beauty and the structure that he finds in God's creation. It's actually quite an accomplishment, and it's quite beautiful. As Yale professor Giuseppe Mazzotta comments on this structure, there is a large aesthetic reason, and the aesthetic reason can be found formulated, crystallized, in a verse from the Book of Wisdom. Quote, "You, O God, have created everything according to number, measure, and weight." End quote. And so the Divine Comedy has to duplicate the symmetry and the order and the harmony that Dante thinks he sees in the universe. The poem is presented and introduced as a reflection of that superior divine order of the universe and wants to be a part of it. And that concludes my video on Canto 2 of Dante's Inferno. I hope you liked it. Please don't forget to like, subscribe, and leave a comment down below. I'm really interested to hear what you have to say about Canto 2 and the Divine Comedy in general. We'll be reading Canto 3 on Monday. Until then, take care of yourselves and others. This is almost exactly what happens to Danto in today. Danto!